Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to BookTube at War. This is a new BookTube event for July that was thought up by a viewer, DDB, and made into a BookTube event by Michael K. Vaughan. And as you can tell from the title, it's all about military literature, military history, military fiction, poetry, science fiction, and fantasy. I love this sort of stuff. I read a lot of it anyway, so this event was right up my alley. And I've been doing the usual practice that I've been following this year with BookTube events is just to chuck a book for the event onto my night's reading, onto the vast amount of reading that I do at night. I do once the world has started to quiet down, and once I've hit my day's work, my day's word count, my day's obligations, my day's deadlines. Then it's time to walk the bean until she's good and tired, settle her in, and read. And I've been doing that with BookTube at War as well. I will continue to do that, for instance, with Book Trek, which is a summer-long event, and also with Garb August, which is right around the corner. The problem with doing that with BookTube at War is that a lot of books that I want to either read or reread are very long. I'm a fast reader, and I have a lot of time to read, but a lot of that time is bespoken. I'm a fast reader, but I can't just absorb a book through my skin. I do need to sit down with it, and usually I get lost in it, pencil in hand. And a lot of the books that I have to read in that nightly reading are so-called work books. They are, I call them work with air quotes because they're pure fun. But nevertheless, they are books that I feel professionally obliged to know about, new releases in the American book market, in the 15 or 16 genres that interest me. That still forms a large chunk of my reading. And there's also the stuff that I get from the Brattle or elsewhere, old additions to the library that I'm going to want to either read or reread exploratorily or whatnot. So BookTube at War can't be everything that I do on a night's reading, unfortunately. And that runs me into a problem because a lot of books that I either want to read or reread for BookTube at War are quite long. So that if I were going to reread it and pay full attention, I would have to give it the whole night, which isn't always possible. In fact, it's not ever possible. So the last couple of nights, I've been working my way through a reread of a book that I'm a little bit abashed about, because I brought up the French and Indian War, the French and Spanish and British colonial wars on the American continent. I brought that up a couple of times on BookTube at War. And on one particular video, when I was bringing that up, I did my usual belly aching about how, where is the new book? Where is the big grand synthesis? This is such an amazing story with so many great characters, and yet. And one of you wrote to me and quietly suggested, the person who wrote the email was very funny about it, saying that they really don't want to get canceled or anything like that. That they approach me with fear and trembling, their great tentacle god. But one of you pointed out that, of course, in relatively recent years, that book was written. It was met with hosannas of praise, including my own. I've read it and loved it. And the person cheekily suggested that perhaps, given my rant the other day, I'm due for a reread. I want to stress here that this BookTube channel of mine is not a slow day-by-day chronicle by which the rest of you watch me descend into dementia. Okay? I'm as sharp as I ever was. And yet, when this person suggested this book, I did a classic Bart Simpson, oh yeah, because it's Fred Anderson's book, Crucible of War, which is exactly what I was describing. This is a huge 700-page book that is incredibly lively. It's incredibly magisterial. The author knows everything about the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War. It knows everything about the subject and has a very good penchant for bringing out the big personalities. This is a war that raged on the American continent and elsewhere, but on the American continent from the mid-1750s to the mid-1760s. It wasn't a short brush thing of any kind. It was long, involved, and violent. And according to Anderson in this book, it laid the groundwork for the American Revolution. He actually goes too far, as you will when Stockholm Syndrome sets in. He goes too far and says that it's more important than the American Revolution. Okay, whatever you say there, Seymour. But as delusional as that is, it does give him the right mind frame to go at this. He goes at it as the fittingly, in the fittingly epic vein that it deserves. And boy, oh boy, rereading this thing, I read half of it the first night and had to force myself to stop. If you see this at your used bookstore or at a library sale or whatever, you're going to see a huge, forbiddingly heavy hardcover with a very classical painting on the cover. And if you're not familiar with military history or narrative history at all, you might look at it and think, oh, no. No, thank you. No, not that. I'm sure that people like it, but no. But oh my, this is so good. It's not as eloquent as Francis Parkman, but nothing is. But it is so good. It is just so good. It takes you through every theater of the war. It gives you vantage viewpoints from all the different sides involved. It elevates the First Nations people who were involved on both sides of the war for the whole of its length. It elevates them far beyond their usual status. In much earlier accounts of the French and Indian War, usually in accounts like that, aside from a few eloquent chieftains, they themselves, the warriors themselves, are usually viewed as kind of barely controlled pit bulls on chains. Certainly not human. Certainly not people who are reading the political landscape. And Anderson dispenses with that completely. This is, as far as he's concerned, this is a war on many sides. Of course, he gives you a lot of foreground, the political tensions that were building in the 1740s and the 1730s, some of which we've seen already on BookTube at War. And then he gives us the inciting incident where an untrained and completely incompetent and overconfident dope of a colonial officer basically trips over his own musket and stumbles two world-straddling empires into a war that neither one of them wanted. What was that officer's name? Oh yeah, George Washington. This was, in case those of you keeping score at home, this is one of arguably 3 wars that Washington started, all of them by accident, all of them through incompetence. This won't turn into a Washington rant. There are all sorts of other characters involved in these pages, and they are all brought marvelously to life. I don't know how I forgot about this thing. I am duly reprimanded, but the person who sent that gentle email was entirely right. I am not going to banish them from the internet. Out of sheer magnanimity, because they were right, I somehow forgot this book. I don't know how I did. This was a joy of a reread. The highlight of my BookTube at War so far, although I have another week to go with BookTube at War. So if I continue to read large books, there's one that's calling to me that's actually connected to this book. There's one that's calling to me that's quite long. That's going to slow down my daily progress on these field reports of mine. Aren't going to be a book a day if I'm doing these huge monsters. I can't devote all of my night to rereading a book this size. Much as I love it, I can't do it. I would fall behind on the, I almost said the real reading that I have to do. I would feel rotten. I've set parameters for my own reading. I maintain we all do that. And the parameters I set for my reading are new releases. If I fall behind on new releases, like every other critic that I know, bemoaning the fact that they're getting to only a tiny fraction of what they know is out there, I will start to feel as seedy and self-loathing as all of them feel. And I don't want to feel that way. Who would? So that has to keep taking precedence. So maybe a shorter work for tonight when I spin the wheel. I've got my eye on a longer work that I will not be able to do it tonight. We'll see. I will make a progress report I'll make a field report the next time I have a book to talk about. But oh my, in the meantime, I cannot recommend this strongly enough. I really can't, especially if you are an American. Because Americans, it's not just in Florida. Americans everywhere tend to be taught their history as though it started with Lexington and Concord in the American Revolution, where someone fired the first shot. Amazingly, it was not George Washington. He did not trip over his musket and kill a redcoat by accident and start the war. I'm amazed at that, but still. Usually Americans are taught their own history as though that's where everything started, and it didn't. It didn't at all. There were enormous tensions, and there were activists who were very much involved in this war who were thinking ahead. They were thinking to bigger things. They were thinking, if we can cause this kind of turmoil, well, who's to say we can't cause more? Who's to say, are we revealing here a light grasp? And can a light grasp be exploited? Anderson does a great job. Too great, of course, because the French and Indian War is not more important than the American Revolution, but still a great job. I worry about this thing because if you see a battered trade paper, the trade paper acts like a brick. I don't actually have a print copy of this thing at the moment. I give it away whenever I find it. But if you were to see, for instance, a hardcover of this at a library book sale or whatnot, you might take a look at it and be dissuaded. Oh my God! And you won't feel that when you're reading it. It's actually very good reading. So there you go. That's my field report for today. I was gently reminded that the book I was belly aching for does exist, and I did praise it, as did every other critic when it came out. That's my field report for today. The Crucible of War is really, really good. We'll see what I pick for tomorrow. Something short we can talk about tomorrow, or maybe something long, so I won't be talking about it until Monday. We will see. I will report back. Thank you, BookTube.